Welcome everybody to the second battle between Ondjage and Bobman. Bobman won the last game and is 1-0 up in this best of 5 series to see who will make it to the quarterfinals of the Warhammer World Championship. And the matchup they have chosen is Vampire Counts versus Tomb Kings, which is very interesting to me. Ondjage back in the day, of course, played a lot of Vampire Counts. In Warhammer 1, they were a very solid faction throughout, well, pretty much all of the patches with one exception. That was before Raise Dead became more powerful and dwarves could just crush the vampires. But yeah, those days are long gone. Now vampires are in a spot where, well, they can definitely take on certain factions better than others, and Tomb Kings is one of the factions they are able to take out, for sure. But Bobman went into this matchup, so should be confident enough, and interestingly enough, doesn't come with a box here. He has a bunch of spread out chaff. The chaff, of course, isn't going to hold very long. The Tomb Guard will, though. But the main reason you don't tend to see very elite infantry from the Tomb Kings too much is these scab scrats, which are incredibly cost effective at taking out their infantry, which is all pretty low armored. It says the Tomb Guard are armored, but they're really not. They're just 50 armor, it's not a lot. And you can see Bobman is putting his Tomb Guard into these little squares to make them more resistant against Scab Scrap. Kind of funny how such an ability really dominates and changes this matchup. It's one of the few matchups where Tomb Kings don't have to deal with burning heads, and then they give the vampire something even better instead. But of course, the Tomb Kings have things too that the Vampire Counts tend to struggle to deal with. The Sphinx of Fusec, just a unit designed to kill Vampire Counts, armored, fire damage, magic damage, anti-large, armor piercing. It's a huge monster that can heal everything the vampires don't like. Etc. You know, sort of the same story with him. Dives into the Blood Knights though, that is probably a mistake. Going through the infantry like that is a good idea, but diving into Blood Knights and Direpack Direwolves is probably not so good. Ondjage, a beautiful reaction here, summoning skeletons to keep the Skeleton Spearman from supporting Cetra, but somehow Cetra still pulls out, and this is often, as a Vampire Counts player, my frustration. In, well, this matchup and certain others as well, where your Blood Knights really get the catch on something and somehow can't hold this around. Ondjage is a game down, and you can see he's really microing his heart out here. It was a beautiful dodge with the Mortis engine, which is of course a very expensive piece and one of the key components of this build. Naturally, when the opponent isn't in a blob, the Mortis engine can't get as much value, but it's still a very important piece here. Regenerating anti-infantry model itself, and also giving AoE heals and increasing the power recharge of Manfred here a little bit. Manfred will be needing a lot of weapons of magic to cast Spirit Leech, Raise Dead, and Invocation consistently. You can already see these dogs begin to crumble. I don't think Ondjage is going to heal them. He probably wants to conserve his Winds of Magic for something else, like his Blood Knights, which once again managed to get the catch, but at the same time there is infantry support, and the Sepulchral Stalkers are also fighting, so the Blood Knights very happy to get that Invocation on them, and also get the support from the Claw of Nagash. And Ondjage wisely retreats from that fight. He's managed to make the Eyes of the Desert crumble. And one thing I think the Vampire Counts need to keep in mind in this matchup is that as long as they don't completely lose units, it's actually favoring them, because their units will heal and the Tomb Kings won't. Or at least the Vampire Counts have units that can heal available. Ondjage is doing a pretty good job with his Claw of Nagash. It has taken some damage, but he's constantly keeping it at the max range of these Skeleton Horse Archers, making it a lot easier to dodge those volleys and stop these guys from getting the necessary damage in. And meanwhile, they're not shooting other targets either. Once again a surround on Cetra, and this time there is no Sphinx. Well, the Sphinx is still over here, but it's not helping him at the moment. And yeah, even the Skeleton Horse Archers thrown into combat against Blood Knights, which is of course not what you want to see. So yeah, Blood Knights They don't have the massive armor piercing output to really take down these monsters quickly, but given enough time and enough support, they will kill them in the end. Speaking of support, here's the Claw of Nagash, here is Manfred von Karstein, who is of course a great fighter, 70 and 50 stats, putting a beating on Cetra. Now, usually, by this point, like 5 minutes into the battle, you don't see a lot of Tomb King's infantry on the field anymore, but some units have mostly stayed out of combat, and you can see sort of a central blob beginning to develop, which, so long as the Claw of Nagash is alive, actually favors the vampires quite nicely. The closer the units are together, the more units can be healed by the Claw of Nagash. It only heals for 2 hit points per second, but, you know, the more... in close, scrappy fights, and especially on valuable units, every bit of hit point that you can get is worth something. These Blood Knights, though, with the Ushabti being summoned, are getting taken down. The drain from the Mortis Engine comes in. The Mortis Engine has to try and keep clearing that chaff, because once these Blood Knights are gone, it's actually going to be relatively scary. The Sphinx of Usek, with its massive damage output, will be able to make short work of that Claw of Nagash, which does have magic resistance, but it also has fire weakness. So the two sort of cancel each other out, and the Sphinx of Usek is basically doing a lot of damage to it. Yeah, it doesn't look good for this Claw of Nagash. Blood Knights, as I said, just disintegrated. There's one more unit over here. Manfred went on a bit of a stroll, and I don't think the Claw of Nagash can be saved at this point. Some wild Eyes of the Desert come out of nowhere and unleash a volley. I felt like those guys should have crumbled ages ago, but here they are, kept in combat by the Realm of Souls. Yeah, the White Kings, this is a picture we often see. White Kings taking down Necrotect, who I think has done his job by this point of healing stuff. But White Kings just sort of getting ignored. They will kill a lot of Skeleton Spearmen, but of course, in this game it's often about the large unit, the mobility units, the leadership units, less about the infantry. So Bobman doing a good job, not trying to focus too much on killing these White Kings, because at this point there's not that much vampire infantry left anyway. So Bobman tried to chase the Claw of Nagash. It of course has that nice chilling aura, keeping these guys off its back. And oh, he kind of pretended he wasn't going for it anymore, but as he gets close he uses that charge speed to go for it again, and I don't know how much is left for Manfred. I don't think he has a lot of Winds of Magic at this point, otherwise he definitely would have used it on his Blood Knights. He opts to go for a zombie summon instead, which isn't terrible, but at this stage I think a heck on the Blood Knights would have been nicer, but of course we don't know the Winds of Magic situation. I have to assume that he simply didn't have the magic for it and couldn't afford to wait for it either. Kinda impressive how long he's been able to keep the Claw of Nagash alive though. Might really make the difference in the end. Oh, and look, there's still a couple of models of Blood Knights fighting. And these guys usually unable to really attack the Sphinx effectively. White Kings could still do quite a bit though, because the Sphinx, despite 66 melee attack, it's actually pretty bad at fighting White Kings. Unlike Cetra, he with his charging animations and anti-infantry can actually make short work of them. And the vampires are still slowly healing, which is of course massive. And ooh, beautiful block there from Manfred, keeping that Sphinx from charging his Claw of Nagash. Yeah, you can only stop him for so long, because once the Sphinx refocuses its attention on Manfred, it's well, not going to take too long to kill him, unfortunately. Now these Skeleton Horse Archers, they're trying to chase, and they have one more speed than the Claw of Nagash. That's quite unfortunate. Maybe a Raised Dead can save the day here, but as I said, I just don't feel like Manfred has a lot of Winds of Magic left. He's trying to get as much healing as possible. Oh, and as I say that, he does actually get a summon. Okay, that's a beautifully timed summon. Good reaction from Bobman, pulling his Skeleton Horseman away. This bought some time for both of these units to heal. But unfortunately, the zombies will not be able to do too much. They will just be ignored and disintegrate, but the damage they did manage to get onto the skeleton horseman actually, well, counts for something at least. But now it seems like Manfred is actually getting surrounded, and he has to commit to the fight. Cetra also coming in. Unit of Sternsman over here. It's kind of forgotten about, as it seems. Could be useful in the fight here for sure, especially at cleaning up those skeleton horse archers. White King coming into the back of Cetra. I think Manfred is about to die, and with that the Vampire Count's leadership can no longer hold up. Yeah, very interesting battle, way more mobile than I'm used to seeing in this matchup. Usually it's a very static Tomb King's build against, well, a rather static Vampire Count's army as well. Like a battle for the remote control between two people at a elderly home. That's what Tomb Kings versus Vampire Counts often ends up looking like. But this was a very dynamic matchup or game between these two. Ondjage, of course, also already a game down, has to keep fighting, doesn't want to give this up. But yeah, balance of power is telling us pretty much everything we need to know at this point. I think maybe he's hoping he will be able to kill Cetra, but the thing is, these health bars, guys, they always look empty, but then you look at the actual unit and it still has 1000 health. So yeah, that is going to be the end, and that's a 2-0 lead for Bobman. Oh my god, Ondjage in trouble. I like the army coming out from him, I have to say. It's kind of what you would expect in this matchup for the most part. Ondjage, of course, good at busting blobs. Sort of a risky investment if it's not too much of a blob. That's, I guess, why it wasn't able to get as much damage. Of course, that Sphinx, just relentless, very powerful unit. Eyes of the Desert also did what they could. Yeah, in this sort of battle, where you basically have two anti-large units against some very powerful large units of the opponent, you kind of have to heal cap your Blood Knights. And for the most part, the Blood Knights received a lot of healing, but they weren't heal capped. And considering these two things were pretty low but still alive at the end, I think that could have made a difference. But yeah, it's all easier said than done in the end. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video, where we will see if Ondjage makes the comeback or if Bobman will take the 3-0 victory.